Okay, welcome to Sea Grant's Integrated Financial Planning Model video series. This video is going to discuss non-use revenues and expenses, or those revenue generating activities that you engage in that do not directly have to do with growing kelp seed or growing kelp itself. As we were developing this model, many potential end users were asking us, well, what about merchandise? What about carbon credits? What about this? What about that? And so we included a page in this model for what we're calling non-use revenues and expenses. Okay, if this is your first time visiting this video series, you should go to the introductory video, which discusses how the model works and how all the pages interact to get you your business planning outputs. And what we're going to do now is navigate over to the non-use revenues and expenses page and discuss it a little further. Okay, so here we are on the non-use revenues and expenses page, and if you have looked at any of the other videos, this page is quite a bit shorter than any of the other input pages. And there's a reason for that. So this model is about the economics of growing kelp or growing kelp seed. This kind of revenue, the revenue that is not associated with growing kelp or growing kelp seed, is not really part of the economics or an economic analysis of kelp aquaculture. And so in response to user requests, we have included this, but only at a very rudimentary level. And so if you plan to have a significant operation besides growing the kelp, that's a whole different business plan. It's a whole different business model, really. So this kind of gives an opportunity to put in some estimates for 3 different types of businesses that could be adjacent to a kelp farm. Okay, but if you need to develop a whole business plan for these activities, that's sort of beyond the scope of what we can do here, because every business is going to be different. You could have a restaurant, you could have an educational operation, you could have a merchandising operation. Okay, so we did sort of think about 3 general categories of activities that people might have, and these 3 general categories have sort of comparable, I guess, cost structures, you could say. One would be physical products, a sale of physical products, branded merchandise. And so the sale of physical products has a cost of goods sold, a direct cost of goods sold. If you're going to be selling hats, you got to buy the hats somewhere, right? So that's your first sort of general category for these non-use revenues. The second general category of non-use revenue, so another kind of business that you could have in addition to the kelp farm or kelp nursery, could be potentially like service related revenue, where you bring people out for tours or you provide education, and the costs associated with that have to do with labor. You got to hire people to conduct these service activities or educational activities. Okay. The third type of revenue that you might be able to generate from this operation would be potentially passive revenue from farming subsidies, from potential sale of ecosystem services. Now, those don't have direct costs associated with them necessarily, but they might have significant upfront costs associated with them. Okay, so those are the 3 general categories that you can model here for non-use revenue. But, in this video series, I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through them, because really they're going to be unique to your business. So let's just do a quick little example of what you might be able to do. Let's say you're going to have a year-round operation selling merchandise through your website for your business. Okay, so let's just say that you're going to have $2,000 a quarter every quarter of the year going forward of revenues. And you're going to have that for all 3 years. And then your direct cost of goods sold for your merchandise is going to be half of what you're selling it for. So let's say that's $1,000. Right, and you just have that. And so the only reason I'm doing this is a very, sort of rudimentary example, but I just want to show you how this works. So we're going to leave it at that. And then when we look at the financial outputs, you will see how this flows. The other thing to note is that, there's really no allowance for, like, again, all the details. Let's say, oh, if I'm going to be selling physical products, do I need a physical storefront? Do I need pay a web designer? Okay, that's what these other expenses are for, right? So let's say that for my merchandising operation, I'm going to have a web design. And that's only going to be a one-time expense, and that's going to be $1,000 at the beginning of all of this, right? And this is the level of detail that it allows for you. Okay, very rudimentary, but it at least allows you to consider these secondary activities, but it's not the primary focus of this model. Okay, so that's as much as we're going to do on this page. And now you're ready to move along to the remainder of the user input sheets of this model.